Okay, looks like we're rolling. Alright, so for this video I'm going to be going over the collar. The good news is I'm pretty sure I figured out how to pause the video and resume. The bad news is I cannot film videos longer than 7 minutes, so I will try and make this work. Okay, so for the collar, you're going to be using pieces 25, which is the actual collar, and then piece 26, which is the collar stand. And you should have cut out 2 of each on the fold so that you get long pieces for all 4. So the first part of the directions are to stitch the collar pieces together along the outer edges, right sides facing together. So you're going to want to take your 2 piece 25s, and remember you wanted to flip one upside down when you cut it, and place right sides together like so, pin in place, and we're going to be sewing the sides, the top edge, and down the other side together, leaving this next space open so that there's somewhere to flip it out. So I'm going to iron this real quick, and then I'm going to sew 5/8 again around the outside of the collar, and I will be right back. Okay, so it looks like this started over again. I will see. Okay, so before I start actually sewing, I just want to point out a couple things so you can see that I have my right sides together and I've pinned around the outer edges. I forgot to mention both 25 and 26 should be interfaced. I unfortunately do not have interfacing at home and cannot get onto campus to get my interfacing, so I'm not going to be using it. The other thing I want to go over is that you guys make sure when you pivot around the corners, you do so very nice and sharply, so when you're sewing with the machine, make sure you leave your needle down when you raise the presser foot and get a sharp 90-degree angle on those corners. One thing that people often do too is to go over the corner a couple times and back stitch in both directions, because that is a point you don't want to end up having a hole. So you can do a little extra stitching there if you want, as long as you can keep it controlled. So again, I'm going to go ahead and sew these outside edges. Okay, so if you guys can see at all, I know it's blurry. Let's see. I did do extra back stitching in the corner. You can kind of tell the thread's heavier just to make that nice and strong. The next thing you want to do is trim your seam allowance so it's not too bulky. So I'm going to trim my seam allowance all the way around, not this edge obviously, to about 1/4 of an inch, and then I'm going to trim one layer a little bit shorter, just so that when I turn this right side out, they don't end at the same point and it's a little less bulky. You also are going to want to miter your corners, because otherwise when you turn the collar right side out, you won't get a pointed corner because all the fabric will be bunched up in there. So want to trim to the corner without going through your stitch line. If you go through your stitch line, you will have a hole in the shirt. So you want to go ahead and trim the seam allowance all the way around, miter the other corner, and then we're going to turn this right side out. You're going to want to make sure to use a corner turner to get a sharp corner. If you don't have one at home, you can use something like your scissors to get that point. You just want to be as delicate as possible so that you don't make a hole in the fabric. But before you start to sew any further with the collar stand, you want to make sure that corner is nice and pointed and ironed, because you won't be able to go back and fix it later on. So I'm going to finish trimming this up and then we'll continue. Okay, so it only says I have 1:30 left on the camera, but we'll see what happens. Okay, so I sewed together my 225 pieces together. So this is going to be your collar. If you're having trouble visualizing it, it will eventually look like that. So like a collar. You can see I got my corners pretty pointed. I did my best to open up those seams. You really don't want bubbly seams, so make sure to really do a good job inside of there, pressing open the two seam allowances. Next, we're going to be attaching 26 to 25. So this is the collar stand, and you'll notice it's longer than the collar. So if you look on the pattern pieces, you'll see a 3 in the corner of 25, and then a 3 here on 26. They're going to line up, and then this piece of 26 is going to extend further. So what I would suggest doing is I went ahead and marked that notch where it has 3 in my blue colored pencil on the edges of my collar stand, so I knew where it would fall. Next, you want to sandwich your collar between the two collar stand pieces.